the United States. So starting off with our second. So today we're going to talk about our second and third president of the United States. So starting off with our second president, that's going to be John Adams. And our third president is going to be Thomas Jefferson. We're going to talk about both the issues that went on during their campaign as well, but also during their presidencies. And these are going to be, remember, those foreign and domestic policies, those foreign and domestic affairs we were talking about with George Washington's presidency. They're going to kind of roll into John Adams and into Thomas Jefferson's presidency as well. So with John Adams, the two major things that go on is going to be the creation of the political parties. That's going to be the first one. Now remember, is this a foreign, which has to do with other countries, a foreign affair, or is this a domestic affair, meaning it only applies to the United States? It's an issue that happens in the United States, and you're going to write a D or an F in the middle of your in your notes. So make sure you're paying attention and you're knowing which one is which. So the creation of the political parties really happens during John Adams' presidency because George Washington did not claim a political party. He was just kind of an independent. He was in between. While John Adams declared himself a Federalist. He belonged to the Federalist Party, and they believed in strong national government, and they believed that the Constitution gave the national government what's known as implied powers. Whereas the Democratic Republicans believed in a stronger state government, and they believed that the national government was only allowed to do what the Constitution said. So if it did not say it in the Constitution, that power was not given to the national government. That power was given to state governments instead. So for example, the most famous example, the one that you probably need to know the most for the STAR, is going to be Alexander Hamilton's National Bank that he created several years before this. The National Bank was not explicitly written in the Constitution. Like, they did not write, we will also create a national bank in the Constitution, which is why the Democratic Republicans did not believe it should exist. Whereas the Federalists were like, well, the power to tax is explicitly written in the Constitution. Where are we going to put that tax money? We are going to have to put it in a bank. It's kind of like common sense that goes together. It didn't have to be specifically written. Anyone with, a few brain cells, in their opinion, anyone with a few brain cells can be able to put the connection together that we're going to need that. And John Adams and Thomas Jefferson were really good friends before they both ran for president, and I'll talk about that in a minute, in a story time here in a minute. But just keep in mind that they wrote the Declaration of Independence together. They were the two main authors of the Declaration of Independence. They were the two main leaders of the Continental Congresses during the Revolution. So, is the creation of political parties, is that a domestic affair or a foreign affair? The XYZ affair, you really don't need to know much about the XYZ affair. It's really hard to get into all the details, and it would take me a whole class period just to explain it to you. So basically what it is there were three American, we're going to call them undercover agents. They were secret agents sent to France. Their names were confidential, so they weren't allowed to release their actual names for privacy reasons. So they were one was called X, the next one was called Y, and the next one was called Z. They were coerced in France to give information about Great Britain because France and Great Britain were in the middle of a war. Now the U.S. is sucked into this war in between France and Great Britain because the United States agents gave France intel. They gave them information about things that were going on in Great Britain. And that caused our country a really big issue between those two major world powers. Alright, so on your notes, please write whether you think the creation of the political parties is a domestic affair or a foreign affair. And please write in your notes whether you think the XYZ affair is a domestic affair or a foreign affair. Okay, so which pillar of United States security would you place the XYZ affair under? Would it be under borders, under trade, or under conflict? I'm only grading the why. You need to tell me why. I don't care which pillar you put it under. I am just grading why you said which pillar it goes under. All right, so some other events that happened in John Adams' presidency, the Aliens and Sedition Acts. This is going to happen after the XYZ affair. This is his response to the XYZ affair. This act gave the president the ability to question and imprison any immigrant. It didn't matter if they were here legally. It didn't matter if they were here illegally, which we really didn't have those standards back then. But anyone that came into the United States, the president had the automatic power to deem them a threat to national security and could imprison them or question them harshly. This is compared to the modern-day Patriot Act, which I do have a story about at my other school. It was a majority Muslim school, which if you don't know what the Patriot Act, it was passed after 9/11 for very good reason. Basically, anyone that looked suspicious, anyone that looked like they could have a bomb or be carrying a knife or be carrying something that could take over a plane, the Patriot Act was passed to be able to take those people, question them harshly, imprison them without their due process that is granted to them in the Constitution. But back to my story, I worked, before I came to Sanger, I worked at a school that did have a lot of Muslim kids, which was the religion that the people who attacked us on 9/11, they did claim to be Muslim. So I was on a trip with some kids, and we had to take an airplane to California. And I had about 15 kids with me, and 7 of them were girls, and I was in charge of the girls because I was the female sponsor there. And one of the girls was wearing a hijab, which is not a face covering, but a head covering that a lot of Muslim girls wear. And she got stopped by security before we got on the plane, and she was questioned harshly. They pulled her into a room. They were questioning her because she had some lotion in a bottle that was too big for what was allowed on the plane. And I ended up being extremely irritated and yelling at security, just telling them, take the lotion and let us get on our plane. She's a 17-year-old girl. She's here with us on a school trip. If you're that concerned about the lotion, just take the lotion. She doesn't care. She said, just take the lotion. If she was hiding something in it, you'd think that she would be like, no, I want my lotion. But she just, hey, take it. I don't care. I just want to go on my trip. I can buy lotion there. But because of the Patriot Act, they stopped her, and they were questioning her, and they had her in handcuffs the whole time. And she was a 17-year-old girl, and they had no reason to handcuff her other than the fact that she was a Muslim, and she had lotion in a normal size bottle, but it was bigger than what was allowed on the plane. So that's similar to what would have happened in the Aliens and Sedition Act. The Virginia and Kentucky resolutions happened as a result of the Aliens and Sedition Act. So the Democratic Republicans were very mad about this because it gave the national government, it gave the president power that wasn't necessarily listed in the Constitution. The Aliens and Sedition Act was a major overreach of power in their opinion. So the Virginia and Kentucky states decided together that they were going to deem the Sedition Acts unconstitutional. They declared that the 10th Amendment of the United States, which gives powers not listed to the states, they declared that that amendment gave them the right to overturn laws that the state actually deemed unconstitutional. This is an issue that goes all the way up to the Civil War. It's one of the causes of the Civil War, that states believed that they had the right to overturn national laws, even though, according to federalism, which is one of our principles of government, well, the federal government is on top, and if the federal government deems that that law is constitutional, then there's nothing the states can do about it because the states are under the federal government. So, Aliens and Sedition Act, are they a national or are they a domestic affair or are they a foreign affair? Write that down in your notes. Which pillar of U.S. security do you think the Aliens and Sedition Acts go under? Remember, I'm only grading the why. Do you think it's a border security issue, a trade security issue, or a conflict security issue? The Virginia and Kentucky resolutions. Is this a domestic affair or is this a foreign affair? All right, now we're going to get into Thomas Jefferson's presidency. All right, so the Louisiana Purchase happens in 1803. This is an important date. Remember that you only have 5 or 6 dates that you absolutely have to memorize for the start, and this is one of them. So I'd circle it or highlight it. 1803 is the Louisiana Purchase. They bought the Louisiana Purchase from France, and it doubled the size of the United States. The Lewis and Clark Expedition. Now, the way that the Louisiana Purchase was written, it said all water that emptied into the Mississippi River now belong to the United States. Well, think about how many rivers empty into the Mississippi River, which is the biggest river, the widest river, the longest river in the United States. Think about how many rivers and creeks and, lakes and all these different forms of bodies of water. How many of those empty into the Mississippi River? I'll give you a hint. Even the Red River empties into the Mississippi River all the way down in Louisiana. So they had to send Lewis and Clark to explore to see exactly how far does the rivers that connect to the Mississippi River, how far do they go? And they really wanted it to go all the way to the Pacific because that means that our country now went from the Atlantic to the Pacific. It takes up an entire continent. Unfortunately, it didn't. It stopped somewhere up in Oregon. But they did go ahead and go all the way to the Pacific. And they did connect with a bunch of Native American tribes. They took down different species of birds, of plants, of animals, and just an interesting tidbit of information. Sacagawea was the leader. I'm sure everyone's heard of Sacagawea. She was the leader of, she led them on their journey. She was very great at knowing other languages. She communicated with the natives, and she translated it to French, which was then translated to English for Lewis and Clark. She did all of this while she was pregnant. She not only did this while she was pregnant, she gave birth on this journey. And that's why she's seen a lot of times with a baby strapped to her back. She's carrying the baby on her back as she's traveling with these men. And it just doesn't get talked about enough that she's like in the middle of a place that she really doesn't know much about. And she's 9 months pregnant doing what these men are doing. And she doesn't get the credit that she deserves because that's hard. So the Louisiana Purchase. In your notes, is this a domestic policy or is this a foreign policy? Foreign affair. And which pillar of U.S. security do you think this should be placed under? Remember, I'm only grading the why. Is it a border? Is it a trade? Is it a conflict? Because remember, this empties into the Mississippi River. And the Mississippi River was the biggest river, and that controlled all the trade in the continental North America. Okay. So add this somewhere under Thomas Jefferson's presidency, the embargo of 1807. All you need to write down is that it limited trade with other countries and prevented most imports. This was caused by the XYZ affair, British imprisoning American sailors, which is called impressment, and we'll talk more about that next week. And there were also pirates that were capturing United States ships and taxing them in the Barbary Seas. So make sure you write that down. All right, so do you think the Embargo Act is a foreign affair or a domestic affair? Who was hurt most by Jefferson's embargo on trade? Okay, in the Embargo Act, which pillar of U.S. security do you think this should be placed under, and why? Should it be under borders, trade, or conflict? I'm only grading the why. Remember, for everything on these slides, for everything on this presentation, you have to have a D or an F off to the side D for domestic, F for foreign.